Hill's Pet Food is currently facing 2 class action lawsuits. The first is for misrepresenting their prescription diets. The diets, in fact, do not fall under FDA guidelines of prescription because they don't include any kind of pharmaceutical ingredients. The suit then alleges that the prices have been artificially raised because of that prescription status. The first suit regarding the labeling of the pet foods as being a prescription diet go way back to 2017 when this case was originally presented to the courts in Illinois. And the primary complaint was violation of Illinois Consumer Fraud and Deceptive Practices Act. The issue is whether the designation of prescription is legal and whether that description and the use of prescription writing by veterinarians in order to get this food, that's the only way that you can buy the food is with a veterinarian's approval, was against the law and caused the foods to be sold at a higher price. So costing the pet owners more for something that was, in fact, not a whole lot different from regular pet foods. So in terms of prescription drugs, there's a very clear definition by FDA. Anything that claims to, let me read the terms here, to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent disease or other condition is considered a drug and must file a new drug application to the FDA and be approved. Pet foods don't fall under FDA guidelines in that way. The only thing that's required is that they are produced in a safe facility and are basically safe for your pets. And so there is no real reason for requiring a prescription for these foods. And in fact, the foods don't contain any substances that are any different materially from other pet foods. And so the owners of these two owners that originally brought the case said they assumed, because the veterinarian had given them the prescription, they were required to have that, and they were paying a higher price, that it must have something different in it. That was definitely not the case. So this has been kind of locked up in courts for various reasons. One is the definition of a class. One was the definition of, or the determination of whether it was reasonable for individuals in that class to assume a higher standard for this food based on the naming, the labeling of the food and the way it's being sold. And then Hills came back and said, well, FDA sort of approved this by allowing us in a letter to sell it this way, when in fact the letter from the FDA simply said, well, if you're going to sell it through veterinarians, we're less likely to enforce the rule. They didn't say they couldn't enforce it. They didn't say that they were accepting what Hills was doing, simply that in terms of priorities, the FDA was going to spend their money somewhere else enforcing other things that they considered to be much more serious. So getting past all of that, then they had arguments about the expert testimony. They had some time delays in terms of scheduling and various other things. It is unclear now. The last note that I could find was from September of 23, hoping to get some sort of final say soon, but I have not been able to find anything that gives us an actual date of resolution for this. But the bottom line is you can make your own decisions of whether or not that is a fair practice, or whether Hills and other veterinary diets are maybe deceiving you in some way, making you feel like the product has something in it that it does not. Now there is some rationale to having these foods sold through veterinarians. They are, in fact, often not truly complete and balanced because they are restrictive in certain nutrients. So that if you were to feed KD to your puppy or kitten, it could have some pretty serious detrimental effects. So there's some rationale to it, but call it prescription, I think, is the issue at hand, and whether they are truly valued higher and people are paying a higher price because of that name is really the concern for that case. The second lawsuit, though, is much more sinister. It alleges that the entire story about the relationship between dilated cardiomyopathy, or DCM, and pet foods is false and was planned, strategically planned by Hill's Pet Food and its many nonprofit arms that fund research. And I want to read to you directly from this lawsuit, or from the court document that was filed for the beginning of this lawsuit. This lawsuit concerns an egregious, wide-ranging, and damaging campaign of coordinated, for-profit, faux scientific misinformation by a large corporation. They go on at the later down to say that the defendants willfully and intentionally made false representations of fact that misrepresented the nature, qualities, and characteristics of the BEG diets, and I'll explain that in a minute. Namely, they willfully misrepresented that there is evidence that BEG diets are correlated, linked, or otherwise associated with canine DCM, when in reality there is none. BEG, as defined by the researchers who happen to also be in the pocket of Hill's, are boutique, exotic, and grain-free foods. When they further went on to define what that meant, it was any food made by any company that didn't sell $2 billion or more worth of pet food. In other words, it wasn't one of the top 4. Hill's is number 3 or 4, depends on where you're at. And in fact, in the 4 years prior to the whole DCM episode, their sales were flat while the pet food industry was rising exponentially. Since this whole episode, Hill's Pet Food has made well over $3 billion additional dollars, an extra billion something per year, as their sales have skyrocketed. And of course, that means that these BEG diets, anything other than the big companies, have decreased as a result. And reading this document was alarming, educational, alarming. The two scientists, well, there were a few, but the two main ones that brought this whole case to the FDA, both were being paid by Hill's. In fact, I think every one of the veterinarians and researchers that brought this whole case to the FDA were being paid by Hill's or some other pet food company. And 23 of the 28 cases of DCM in 2018 that created this whole episode were brought by these two researchers. And yes, it makes sense that if you find something that's truly a problem, you would want to bring it to the FDA and let them know. However, it was pretty clear in the beginning that they were cherry-picking the cases as requiring that they, almost requiring that they were not feeding Hill's or Purina or Mars or Blue Buffalo, which are the four main companies. So it was unclear, in the beginning. I think there were a lot of us who were talking about it when it first came out, saying this doesn't make any sense to be able to need to feed grain to your pet who is clearly a carnivore. That's really like telling you that cows need meat, and it makes no biological sense. But regardless, this was what was presented. The FDA took it as a legitimate concern. They are concerned about your pets. However, in the ensuing time, as research was coming out, it was, the paperwork is pretty clear. But let me give you a little bit more background about Hill's Pet Food and their many arms. So Hill's Pet Food is owned by Colgate-Palmolive, but Hill's has subsidiary companies that are nonprofit research companies or that fund research in various places, very specifically at veterinary schools. And that sort of makes sense that a large pet food company would want to, if they truly care about your pet's health, they would want to fund research. That makes perfect sense. However, there are specific guidelines. If I'm working for any company and I'm doing research that could benefit that company, I am required to write that or put that potential conflict of interest on the research papers. The lawsuit states it, and I went back and verified, but the research papers that were written by these veterinarians show no indication that they're working or paid by Hill's. In fact, they show their associations as being with some very prestigious veterinary schools. And I want you to understand that those of us in veterinary school, we didn't get nutritional information in an extensive amount. Most of it came from Hill's. In fact, my textbook was written by Mark Morris, who was the founder of Hill's Pet Food. The books were donated to the school. They were free for me. That's kind of a bonus for a veterinary school student who's poor. We got Hill's Pet Food really cheap. We continued to be wooed by the pet food companies all the way through, even in practice. And they also sponsor the veterinary meetings. What was more alarming to me was that the research arms, the nonprofit research arms of Hill's Pet Food, is also funding the research arms of the American Veterinary Medical Association. And without disclosure, right? There's no open disclosure. As a veterinarian in practice, you're busy, didn't get a whole lot of background in veterinary school about nutrition. We depend on our association, the American Veterinary Medical Association, to provide us with information that we can pass on to you to help you keep your pets healthier. It turns out that because of Hill's support for the American Veterinary Association and all the research that goes behind it, a lot of the information that has been presented in that journal and many others, and on websites, and in very many public places for pet owners like you, have been funded by Hill's. So I wanted to bring this to your attention because I know I get questions all the time. What do I feed my pet? What's the healthiest thing? You're getting conflicting information from your veterinarian, from holistic veterinarians like me who have been telling you that this whole grain thing doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and we're trying to give you better information with the documentation and the research that goes behind it. But it is really challenging for all of you. I understand that, and you're trying to keep your pets healthy, but you're getting a lot of mixed information. I understand your challenge, and my goal is to try and continue to bring to you real information that's going to help you make the best choices for your pets. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll try and help you with your concerns. Your veterinarians are trying. They are dealing with the information that they are being given through organizations that they trusted and probably still do trust, and I'm sure there's some really good information still coming from those organizations, but it is a huge challenge when there is this much money behind such an incredible scheme. So I wanted to let you all know that we're here for you. Hang in there. You're doing the best you can, trying to get as much information as you can.